Good afternoon, Pastor Matthew, Hollywood United Methodist Church, to help you along with our journey through the Gospel of Luke in the season of Advent. As I mentioned the other day, since I was derelict in my duties, we are doing some two-a-days. So here's your first one on today. The 17th is the one that you should have had on the 15th. It's going to sound very familiar, but maybe afterwards we'll talk about when it isn't. And it reads, "Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming close to hear him. The Pharisees and scribes were complaining, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.' Then Jesus told them this parable. 'What human among y'all, if he has 100 sheep and loses one of them, wouldn't leave the 99 in the open pasture and go after the lost one until he finds it? When he has found it, he joyfully places it on his shoulders, and when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, "Y'all rejoice with me, for I have found my lost sheep." I tell y'all that in the same way there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who don't need repentance. Or what woman, if she had 10 silver coins and lost one of them, wouldn't light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Y'all rejoice with me, for I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell y'all, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Then Jesus said, "A certain man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the estate that will come to me.' So he divided his livelihood between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. There he squandered his estate with wild living. When he had spent all of it, a strong famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out as one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his belly with the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I'm here lost with hunger? I will get up, go to my father, and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and felt gut-wrenching sympathy, and ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, y'all bring the best robe and put it on him, and y'all put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Y'all bring the fatted calf, kill it. Let's eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' Then they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field. As he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he summoned one of the servants and asked him what was happening. 'Your brother has returned,' he told him, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he's received him back safe and healthy.' But the older son was enraged and refused to go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I have served you, and I never disobeyed a command of yours. But you never gave me a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has devoured your livelihood with prostitutes, comes, you kill the fattened calf for him.' The father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours.' But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." This is the word of God for us and for many, the people of God. Thanks be to God. As I said, familiar stories. We have the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. Again, going back to that Amy Jill Levine study I talked about the other day, the one right all the way. It's hard to do this backwards. Right there. This idea of these three being put together in purpose, that potentially telling it that way. And we've known them for a while. When we did the study on Amy Jill Levine's thing, most of these are ones that we knew. We had pretty strong opinions about it. We could talk about ourselves being a lost sheep or one of the 99 or the brothers and all that stuff. Perhaps you've known it since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, as they say. But one of the things that changes while the story doesn't change is we change, right? It's that old thing, you can never walk through a creek twice because the second time you're different and the creek is different. Stories hit us at different parts in our lives. I was speaking with somebody, and I'm not going to say their name, but they've had issues with their children. And one of them could very easily be described as prodigal, and one as very close and, I don't want to say obedient, but just, does what they need to do, has their life on the right track. And when they read this, they said they felt like it was just like they'd read it for the first time in some ways. That maybe you heard this when you were a kid and you started thinking of yourself. Are you the younger brother? You're always thinking about that. But then you become a parent maybe. And then you start to wonder about what it was like to be the father. But then maybe you go through a situation where you do have a child who prodigals, who runs off, and does their own thing. And maybe even their own thing is not a good thing, right? You look at it and you're like, you want to help them, but that's not what you're able to do. And you long for the day when they will come home. And it's interesting in this way of speaking about hope some ways, about like the story. We hear about the father in the beginning, and then we hear about the father when he sees the son coming back. We don't ever hear anything about the father in the intervening time, right? When he's given half to the younger son, and then when the younger son left, we don't know how long it was. We don't know how long he'd been gone. We don't know what it was like in that situation. And that's one of these things about the parables. We had a question the other day about, why is it so difficult and hard? And I think some of it is just because we hear it different times depending on where we are, and we can think about it in different ways. I'm sitting here, this is the 17th, so just a few days ago we all had the awful tragic news of Rob Reiner and his wife. Rob, by all accounts, it seems had a son who did prodigal, and the return is very different, right? It's just these different things to make us think about, okay, how do I read this? How do I interpret this? How do I allow this to change the way I see the world? Because one of the great things about this one is it is left open-ended. Brian Getty, who we had heard from earlier in this one, he preached a sermon a few years ago on connecting this in some ways to Jonah too, in these open-ended stories, where stories of great mercy and stories of great resentment, and then the stories that don't have an ending. And I think one of the ways to find out that is like it's kind of up to us. We get to decide, if we are Jonah and we see God's mercy to the people of Nineveh, how will we respond to that? If we are the older brother, how will we do that? But I want to ask maybe a different question here, given my conversation with this person yesterday. The story ends where the father has told the older son, you've always been with me, everything I have is yours, but this brother of yours, my son, he was dead and now he's back to life. He's lost and now he's found. And then presumably he walks in, and we don't know what the older brother does. Maybe perhaps we feel often like the older brother until we get to decide, will we go into the party or will we not? But I wonder, what would it look like if you cut the parable short at different parts? Right? What if, it's hard to know because you already know, but what if, if we look at it here, let's say after verse 13, not many days later the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. If we just stop the story there, what might that tell us? If we stop the story when the younger son is feeding the pigs and his belly is empty, and he says, "I want to go home, and this is why." How might you think about it if you stopped the story there? If the story ended simply with the party and never mentioned the older brother again? What would it be like if you stopped the story there? Just trying those different places just to stop and think about what that is, and specifically in your own experience, because maybe you have been prodigal. Maybe you have been the older brother, the diligent one. Maybe you've been the father. Maybe you've been a little bit of all three at different parts. I think it's worth sitting there and thinking about what that story might mean to you, or maybe then to somebody else in those different situations. Familiar stories, but maybe there's still something here for us to still learn from it. So give it some thought. As we are in two-a-days right now, you can come back this evening for the next chapter. Y'all have a wonderful day out there. I will see y'all soon.